The moment you board a plane, a quiet transaction begins, and almost nobody on your side of it knows it's happening. You find your seat, you stow your bag, you buckle in, and somewhere between takeoff and landing, you leave value on that aircraft that you paid for and never collected. Not once, not twice, every single flight. This isn't about loopholes or gaming the system. What I'm about to walk you through are legitimate, documented things your cabin crew is authorized to provide. Things that are sitting in their carts, stashed in their galleys, outlined in their service protocols. That they will hand over the second you ask, but that they are specifically not trained to offer first. That's the part nobody talks about. The silence isn't accidental. I've spent a significant amount of time going through cabin crew service manuals, passenger rights frameworks across multiple carriers, and conversations with people who spend years working those aisles. What I came away with wasn't outrage exactly, but it was close. Because these aren't secrets that require special status or elite membership to access. They're just things. Available things. Things you've been flying past for years. 7 of them, specifically. And I want to start with the one that seems too obvious to matter, because that's exactly why it gets missed. The full can. You order a Coke, a ginger ale, a juice, whatever your drink of choice is at 30,000 feet. The steward pours some of it into a cup of ice and puts the rest of the can back on the cart. On domestic flights especially, this happens on virtually every single service. And the thing is, that can is yours. The whole thing. There is no airline policy that says you only get a partial pour. That's a workflow habit, not a rule. When you ask your cabin crew for the full can, on most carriers, they will hand it to you without a second thought. Some will even apologize for not offering it directly. I've seen it happen dozens of times. The moment you say, "Can I have the whole can?" the response is usually just, "Of course." That's it. No negotiation, no special request form. You just had to say the words. Why does this matter beyond the few extra ounces of soda? Because it's a microcosm of the entire dynamic. The default is the efficient default. It conserves stock, it speeds up service, it keeps the cart moving. Your comfort is a secondary consideration unless you make it a primary one. That framing applies to everything else on this list. Hydration is actually the bigger conversation here. Water on aircraft is something most passengers radically underprioritize, and it has real consequences. Cabin humidity typically sits between 10 and 20%, which is drier than most deserts. Your body is losing moisture the entire time you're in the air, and the little cups they hand you during service are genuinely insufficient if you're on anything longer than a 2-hour flight. Here's what most people don't realize. Your flight crew has a water supply in the galley that they use throughout the flight. And on most carriers, if you walk back during a non-service period and politely ask for a refill of your bottle, or just ask for a full cup of water, they will give it to you, repeatedly, without issue. They're not going to announce this. The service schedule is the schedule, but the water is there, and you are allowed to have it. Don't wait for the cart. Ask. Snacks. This is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the variation between carriers is wide, but the underlying principle holds almost universally. On flights where a snack service is offered, there is almost always more product in that cart than what gets distributed in a single pass. Pretzels, cookies, crackers, whatever the carrier is handing out that day. If you ask for a second portion, the default answer on most airlines is yes. I know how this sounds. It sounds too simple. But think about the last time you actually asked. Most people don't, because the service is framed as a distribution. 1 item per person. Cart keeps moving. The framing creates the limit. The actual supply doesn't. On longer domestic flights, and on transatlantic or transpacific routes, the surplus is even more pronounced. Cabin crew on long-haul flights have told me that the amount of snack product that goes back into storage, or gets discarded, is considerable. You're not taking food from anyone, you're just not leaving it behind. Now here's where it starts getting uncomfortable. At least for anyone who flies long-haul in economy regularly. On flights with a genuine meal service, international routes, overnight flights, any journey where the airline serves a full hot meal, there is frequently a small number of unused business or premium economy meals that don't get claimed. Upgrades happen at the gate. Passengers don't board. Dietary preferences shift. The result is that on a meaningful percentage of long flights, your cabin crew has extra hot meals somewhere behind the curtain. Can you always get one? No. Is it guaranteed? Absolutely not. But if you're on a 6, 8, 10-hour flight and you're still hungry after your economy meal, it costs you nothing to quietly and politely ask a crew member whether anything extra is available. The worst answer is no. The best answer, and it happens more than you'd think, is that someone brings you a business class entree because it was going to go to waste either way. This isn't a hack, it's just asking. Comfort items. On long-haul flights especially, airlines carry a supply of what the industry calls amenity kit. Components, eye masks, earplugs, small dental kits, socks, beyond what gets automatically distributed. Economy passengers often don't receive these at all on certain carriers, or receive a stripped-down version. But the full items exist in that galley. I've talked to cabin crew who say that in 15+ years of flying, they can count on one hand the number of economy passengers who asked for an eye mask and didn't receive one. The ask is unusual enough that most crew members are genuinely happy to fulfill it, because it's a simple request that costs nothing and makes their job easier. You want to sleep. Give them the chance to help you do that. An extra blanket falls into this category too. On many carriers, blankets are distributed early in the flight, and then the remainder sits in overhead compartments in the galley area. If you get cold, or if you didn't receive one, you ask. That's the whole process. Pay close attention to this next section, because it has the most direct financial implication of anything we've covered. When a flight is significantly delayed, typically defined as 2 or more hours depending on the carrier and the route, most major airlines have internal protocols for providing affected passengers with meal vouchers, hotel accommodation for overnight delays, or travel credit. Here's the critical distinction most people miss. At the gate, before you board, these offers are sometimes made proactively. Once you're on the aircraft and the delay is happening from the tarmac, the proactive communication drops significantly. The crew managing the cabin is not the same department managing delay compensation. Which means if you're sitting on a delayed plane for 2-3 hours and nobody has mentioned anything, the absence of an offer is not the same as the absence of an entitlement. When you deplane, go directly to the gate agent or customer service desk and ask specifically what you're owed for the delay. Ask for a meal voucher. Ask whether accommodation is available if an overnight stay became necessary. Ask what compensation the carrier provides under their own passenger commitment policy. Not just government regulation, but their own published policy, which is often more generous than the minimum required. The word ask is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The airline's default is not to volunteer it. The flight crew has a drinks trolley in the galley that doesn't fully overlap with the main service cart. On flights where alcohol is available for purchase, or where it's complimentary in certain cabins, the selection in storage is broader than what gets announced. If you're looking for a specific mixer, a particular spirit, or even just a second drink later in the flight when the trolley is long gone, walk back to the galley during a quiet period and ask. Cabin crew have discretion here, and a polite, low-key request during a calm stretch of the flight is a very different conversation than demanding something mid-service. Timing and tone matter. But the inventory exists, and they have the authority to pour from it. The 7th item is the one that cabin crew, when I've spoken to them off the record, say passengers almost never ask for, and it's also the one they seem most genuinely willing to provide. Seat changes, not upgrades in the traditional sense. I'm not talking about moving to business class for free, but lateral moves within the economy cabin that can dramatically change your experience. Bulkhead seats have extra legroom and no recline from a seat in front of you. Exit row seats have considerably more space. Window seats versus middle seats. Rows closer to the front that deplane faster. These reassignments happen throughout every flight as passengers settle in, as people move to be near travel companions, as crew members identify seats that weren't occupied. If the person next to you didn't show up, the row might functionally be yours, but you might also be able to move to a better empty row entirely. Ask your cabin crew early in the flight, quietly and without fuss, whether any seats with more space have opened up. Phrase it simply: is there anything with a bit more room that's still available? On a flight that isn't at capacity, which is more common than airlines like to advertise, the answer is frequently yes. I've had this work on short-haul domestic flights, on transatlantic crossings, on everything in between. The seat you boarded with is not necessarily the seat you have to keep. Here's what ties all 7 of these together, and why I think this is worth your time beyond the individual tips. The cabin environment is designed to feel complete. The service feels comprehensive. You get your drink, you get your snack, you get your meal, the lights dim, the flight ends. Everything feels accounted for. That completeness is the product. It's designed to feel like you received everything, which means most people never think to ask whether there's more. But there always is. More water, more food, more comfort, more assistance, more recourse when things go wrong. The gap between what you're automatically given and what you're entitled to request is wider than it has any right to be. And the only thing bridging that gap is the willingness to say something. You now know what the majority of passengers sitting on flights right now don't know. Not because the information was classified, not because it required some elite frequent flyer status to access, but because nobody said it plainly and directly in a way that stuck. That changes today, at least for you. Next time you board, you're not just a passenger moving through a managed experience. You're someone who knows the full scope of what that aircraft is carrying and what you can legitimately ask for. The full can, the extra water, the second snack, the comfort items sitting in the galley, the extra meal that might otherwise go untouched, the compensation you're entitled to when delays hit, the seat that fits you better than the one you were assigned. 7 things, all of them available, none of them offered first. Share this with someone you know who flies regularly. Most of the people in your life have spent years leaving these things behind without realizing it. They deserve to know what you now know. Hit that share button, and I genuinely mean that. Not for the algorithm, but because the person you're thinking of right now has probably sat in a middle seat on a 6-hour flight and never once asked if anything else was open. And if this shifted the way you think about air travel rights, come back next week, because I'm going deep on what you're owed when an airline loses, damages, or delays your baggage. And the documented gap between what they offer and what they're actually liable for is significant.